I wasn't looking for answers. I was just looking for a scarf. Something simple, something to remind me of a normal day. It was tucked away in the back of his closet behind boxes of old shoes and sweaters that still smelled like them. As my fingers brushed against the cedar floorboards, I felt it. A slight give. A loose board. Curiosity, or maybe just a desperate need for a distraction, made me pull.
Ho, ho, ho!
And there it was. Not a scarf, but a small, leather-bound journal. It felt cold in my hands, heavy, like it was filled with more than just paper. It felt like a secret. Sitting there on the floor, surrounded by the ghost of his cologne, I opened it. The first few pages were exactly what you'd expect. Notes about bills, thoughts on books he was reading, grocery lists.
Ho, ho, ho!
The mundane, beautiful details of a life we shared. It almost made me smile. But then, page by page, the handwriting started to change. His neat, familiar script became frantic, desperate. The ink was pressed so hard into the paper it almost tore through. The lines trembled, and one word started appearing over and over again: fear. This wasn't the fear of a bad day at work or a looming deadline.
Ho, ho, ho!
This was a deep, constant dread that bled through every sentence. It was a shadow that had been living with him, a shadow I never saw. He wrote about a project. He never explained what it was, never gave it a name. There was just this suffocating, relentless pressure that seemed to be crushing him. He mentioned meetings, late nights, a weight he couldn't share.
Ho, ho, ho!
Why didn't he tell me? Did he think I couldn't handle it? Or was he trying to protect me? Then the symbols started. They weren't just doodles. They were drawn with a terrifying precision. A serpent eating its own tail, an Ouroboros, triangles folding into impossible, non-Euclidean shapes, and an eye, not a normal eye, but one encircled by what looked like teeth.
Ho, ho, ho!
They felt ancient, forbidden. My mind didn't understand them, but my body did. A cold shiver ran down my spine. My heart started pounding against my ribs, an echo of the fear in his writing. This wasn't just stress. This was the journal of a man whose mind was cracking under a terrible strain. I had to force myself to turn the page. And that's when it all clicked into a horrifying kind of focus.
Ho, ho, ho!
Two words underlined twice, dug into the paper: blackmail, covered up. The words that followed were fragments, the disjointed thoughts of a man who felt like he was drowning. A mistake from the past, a voice that won't stop. Money only makes it worse. My husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, was being controlled.
Ho, ho, ho!
He wrote about meetings at the old abandoned mill down by the river, envelopes of cash exchanged in the dead of night, threats that no one else could hear, whispered promises of ruin. He wasn't just running from debt or from us. He was running from someone who knew her. Secret he was desperate to keep buried, someone who owned him.
Ho, ho, ho!
The closet, which a moment ago had felt like a sanctuary, a place full of warm memories, suddenly felt like a trap. The walls seemed to be closing in. The whole world felt tilted, unsafe. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I knew who I had to call. I called Detective Miller. When Miller arrived, I couldn't find the words.
Ho, ho, ho!
How do you explain that the life you thought you had was a lie? How do you describe the feeling of reading your own husband's slow descent into despair? I didn't try. I just handed him the journal. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable, a professional mask he never seemed to take off. He turned page after page, his brow furrowed slightly. But I saw the shift in his eyes.
Ho, ho, ho!
He wasn't just reading a journal anymore. He was piecing together a tragedy. He stopped when he reached the pages with the symbols. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves and traced the strange, sharp lines with his finger, as if trying to understand their power. He took out his phone, carefully photographing each symbol, each frantic line of text, and sent them off to somewhere.
Ho, ho, ho!
To someone who could decipher these warnings. When he finally looked up at me, his voice was quiet, stripped of his usual detective's authority. It was the voice of a man delivering a verdict. "This isn't just evidence, Sarah," he said, his gaze holding mine. "This is a collapse." The truth hit me then. A physical blow that knocked the air from my lungs.
Ho, ho, ho!
Thomas didn't disappear because he wanted a new life. He disappeared because it was the only way out he could see. He was cornered, trapped by his past and by a predator I never knew existed. This journal wasn't a breadcrumb trail leading me to him. It was a goodbye letter. A confession. It was the last will and testament of a man breaking apart from the inside.
Ho, ho, ho!
And standing there, in the wreckage of my life, I realized something that turned my blood to ice. For the first time, I understood that I might not be searching for a missing person. I might be searching for a body. The man I loved might not be lost. He might be gone forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of the journey.
Ho, ho, ho!
This investigation has taken a turn none of us could have expected. The woods weren't just dark. They felt alive, like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting. With every step I took, the crunch of leaves under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. Every shadow seemed to twist and writhe in the corner of my eye, making me feel like I was being watched. My name's Mark Reynolds, and I was leading the way.
Ho, ho, ho!
Don't get me wrong, I'm no hero. Not the confident guy everyone looks up to. I'm just a man, and the guilt I carry feels heavier than any backpack. It's a weight strapped to my spine, a constant reminder of why we're out here. Behind me, two friends followed, Sarah and Ben. They were the only ones left who still believed my brother Thomas was worth finding.
Ho, ho, ho!
After he vanished, everyone else gave up, wrote him off. But not us. Our flashlights sliced through the thick, inky blackness, but the beams were thin, nervous. They gave us just enough light to see the path a few feet ahead, but nowhere near enough to make us feel safe. Gnarled branches, like skeletal fingers, reached out and snagged our jackets, trying to hold us back.
Ho, ho, ho!
The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something ancient and unsettling. It felt like we weren't just walking in the woods. We were being swallowed by them. Every step felt like we were trespassing, walking deeper into someone else's territory.
Ho, ho, ho!
This whole crazy search started with Thomas's journal. It was filled with strange symbols, cryptic notes that led us here. One entry described a massive oak tree split down the middle by lightning. Another had a series of numbers that, we figured out, corresponded to paces from that tree. The clues were like riddles, nonsense to anyone else. But Thomas and I, we grew up in these woods.
Ho, ho, ho!
They were our playground. So, when Sarah and Ben hesitated at a wall of thorny bushes, I didn't. I knew this was the way. I pushed through, ignoring the scratches, and that's when we saw it. A cabin. It wasn't on any map. You couldn't see it from any trail. It was old, sagging, practically hidden by the overgrown forest, as if it was meant to stay forgotten forever.
Ho, ho, ho!
Our flashlight beams trembled as they landed on the door. I took a deep breath, placed my hand on the weathered wood, and pushed. The hinges shrieked in protest, a sound that echoed through the unnervingly quiet woods. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with the smell of dust, old smoke, and something else, a faint, metallic tang. Someone had been here, and recently.
Ho, ho, ho!
Inside, a single chair was pulled up to a small table. On it sat a half-empty bottle of water and a plate with a few crumbs. This wasn't the scene of a long-abandoned shelter. It was the scene of an interruption. Whoever was here had left in a hurry. Then, Sarah gasped. Her flashlight beam was fixed on a simple cot in the corner.
Ho, ho, ho!
There, lying on a thin, rough blanket, was Thomas's handkerchief. The one she'd embroidered his initials on herself. The one he always kept in his coat pocket. He was here. He had slept in this bed. He had lived in this very room. And from the looks of it, he was running from something. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knelt, my hands shaking as I scanned the floor.
Ho, ho, ho!
My fingers found the edge of a loose floorboard near the cot. Using my pocket knife, I pried it up. Tucked beneath it was a small pouch made of oilskin, hidden away. My hands trembled as I untied the leather cord and tipped the contents out. More notes, but these were different from the journal. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled, and uneven. The words were a testament to pure terror.
Ho, ho, ho!
A watcher in the trees, one note read. Another said, voices at the door. The last one sent a chill down my spine. The final meeting is close. These weren't just the words of a man who was scared. These were the words of a man who was being hunted. Someone had driven Thomas out here. Someone had followed him into this remote wilderness. And the most terrifying part,
Ho, ho, ho!
that someone was probably still close. The room fell utterly silent. None of us spoke. None of us even dared to breathe. Because we all felt it then, a cold, prickling sensation on the back of our necks. We weren't alone. The woods were listening. And so was whatever had been watching my brother. The silence was broken by a sudden, sharp crack from outside. A twig snapping under a heavy foot.
Ho, ho, ho!
We froze, our eyes wide in the darkness, our flashlights instantly extinguished. We were plunged into absolute black, trapped in this tiny cabin, knowing that something was out there, circling us. Waiting, every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl now sounded like a threat. The hunter had become the hunted, and we had just walked straight into the trap.
Ho, ho, ho!
The minutes stretched into an eternity. All we could do was listen to the sound of our own frantic heartbeats and the chilling, deliberate footsteps that were now getting closer and closer to the cabin door. The interview room was cold, sterile, but the real chill came from the man sitting across the table. Mark Reynolds looked like he was about to shed. His hands trembled so violently they blurred at the edges, and beads of sweat traced paths down his temples, like tiny rivers of fear. His breath was a shallow, desperate little dance in his chest.
Ho, ho, ho!
I sat opposite him, Detective Miller, and I let the silence do the work. Silence is a scalpel, you see, it's patient. It finds the weak spots, the hidden wounds, and it pries them open. And Mark, he was already bleeding internally. The confession didn't come out like a dam bursting. It was more like a slow, agonizing leak.
Ho, ho, ho!
A drip, drip, drip of truth that seemed to pull pieces of him out with every word. It was painful to watch, like seeing someone pull rusted barbed wire from their own chest, inch by agonizing inch. His voice, when it finally came, was a ghost of a sound, a whisper that barely disturbed the thick, heavy air between us.
Ho, ho, ho!
I knew he breathed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I knew he was being blackmailed. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. as if saying the words aloud might somehow absolve him. It wouldn't. He described the last time he saw Thomas, not the vibrant, confident man everyone in Maple Creek thought they knew, but a hollowed-out shell.
Ho, ho, ho!
Thomas had come to him, his eyes dark with panic, begging for help in a voice that was brittle and broken, but Mark didn't help. He just listened. He sat there, a passive audience to his friend's slow-motion implosion. And by the time the full weight of the threat, the sheer depth of the darkness Thomas was sinking into, finally registered in Mark's mind.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was too late. Thomas was already gone, disappeared, vanished into the thin, crisp air of their perfect little town. But I wasn't there for his tears. I wasn't there to offer a shoulder to cry on. I was there for the truth, the hard, ugly, and varnished truth. My voice cut through his quiet misery, sharp and precise. Why didn't you report it, Mark? I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering.
Ho, ho, ho!
If you knew he was in trouble, why wait until now, until he's a ghost on a missing persons poster? I paused, letting the question hang in the air, letting it burrow under his skin. What were you protecting? Or who? Each question was a hammer blow against the fragile dam he'd built around his guilt.
Ho, ho, ho!
I could see the cracks spreading across his composure. He tried to hold it together, to seal the breaches, but guilt is like water. It's relentless. It always finds a way through, seeping through the tiniest fissures until the whole structure collapses. His voice trembled, a low, unstable vibration. He folded in on himself, his shoulders caving as if under an immense, invisible weight.
Ho, ho, ho!
He was breaking, and that's when the real secret, the one buried beneath the blackmail and the fear, began to surface. This wasn't just about Thomas's disappearance anymore. I could feel it. The scope of it was widening, stretching back in time. It was about this town. It was about Maple Creek itself.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was about something that happened years ago, something they had all tried to bury so deep they hoped it would turn to dust. But secrets like that don't turn to dust. They grow roots, dark, tangled roots that snake their way through the foundations of a community, poisoning everything they touch. Mark swallowed hard, the sound loud in the oppressive quiet.
Ho, ho, ho!
His eyes darted around the room, as if the ghosts of the past were pressing in on him from the corners. People in this town, he began, his voice raspy, strained. They're not who they pretend to be. The carefully constructed facade of Maple Creek, the bake sales, the friendly waves, the white picket fences, it was all starting to feel like a stage set, alive.
Ho, ho, ho!
And Thomas wasn't running from a simple blackmailer demanding money. He wasn't running from shame. According to Mark, he was running from something far more terrifying. He was running from power. The kind of power that builds empires on secrets and buries its sins under the floorboards of a town hall.
Ho, ho, ho!
He was running from the very people who built their idyllic lives on a foundation of lies, a lie that Thomas had been forced to keep. And now, after all these years, that lie was stirring. It was waking up, and it was hungry. Mark's voice cracked, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The last of his composure disintegrated. I wanted to protect him, he sobbed, the words tangled with regret.
Ho, ho, ho!
I swear I did, but I was so scared. He choked on the final, devastating admission, the words clawing their way out of his throat. I think he left to save his family. From us. From the good people of Maple Creek, from the friends and neighbors who smiled at his kids in the street. He collapsed forward, his head in his hands, his body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs.
Ho, ho, ho!
The sound filled the small room, a symphony of guilt and grief. But I didn't move. I just leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable, because the pieces were finally clicking into place. This case was no longer about a missing man. It had transformed into something much bigger, much darker. It was about a town built on a secret, a town that had become a prison for its own people.
Ho, ho, ho!
And secrets like that, secrets buried with bone and blood, they don't stay buried forever. Sooner or later, they dig their way out. And they usually drag the people who buried them down into the dirt with them. My investigation wasn't over. It was just beginning. The truth didn't come from a frantic search in the woods. It didn't emerge from a tearful, last-minute confession. No, the truth arrived quietly, clinically, in Detective Miller's email inbox. It was a security clip, just 23 seconds long. From a convenience store 50 miles away from Maple Creek. The timestamp was the real shocker. Full week after Thomas Johnson supposedly disappeared.
Ho, ho, ho!
And there he was, clear as day under the harsh fluorescent lights. Thomas, wearing a plain baseball cap pulled low, a dark jacket zipped up to his chin. His head was down, his movements deliberate. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding in terror. He was just buying a loaf of bread, the casual and remarkable movement of someone who belonged there.
Ho, ho, ho!
Someone who had simply chosen to start a new life, miles away from the one everyone thought he'd lost. There was no panic in his eyes, no fear in his posture. Just a man who had walked away. And that single, mundane act changed everything. When Detective Miller showed Sarah the footage, her heart broke twice. The first break was a wave of overwhelming relief. It crashed over her, taking her breath away.
Ho, ho, ho!
He was alive. He was breathing. He was somewhere in the world safe. That single thought was a life raft in the storm of grief she'd been drowning in. But then came the second break, sharper and far more painful. It was a cold, creeping anger that started in her gut and spread like ice through her veins. He let them suffer. He let his own children cry themselves to sleep at night, convinced their father was gone forever.
Ho, ho, ho!
He let the entire town of Maple Creek tear itself apart with worry and suspicion. And all that time, he was out there, buying bread, living as if none of it mattered, as if their pain was a distant, irrelevant memory. The man she loved, the man she had mourned so deeply, had become someone she didn't recognize at all.
Ho, ho, ho!
Or maybe, a chilling thought whispered in her mind, he was finally showing her who he had always been, hidden beneath the surface. And Maple Creek. Oh, Maple Creek turned on a dime. The community that had rallied together, a beacon of hope and support, just switched off. The sympathy that had flowed like a river, it dried up instantly. The prayer circles that had filled the town square, they vanished.
Ho, ho, ho!
The search parties, the flyers, the desperate pleas for information, gone. The whispers started immediately, spreading from house to house like a virus. The words were no longer victim or missing. Now they were coward, liar, manipulator. Thomas Johnson was no longer the town's tragic hero. In their eyes, he was now the villain of his own story. He hadn't been taken, he had deceived them all.
Ho, ho, ho!
The entire ordeal, the shared grief, the community's effort, it all felt like a sick joke, and he was the one telling it. Detective Miller sat alone in his dimly lit office, the glow of the monitor painting his face. He stared at the paused video frame, at the ghost who had just bought bread. If Thomas staged everything, if he was capable of such a cold, calculated deception,
Ho, ho, ho!
then every single clue they had found was a lie, a performance. The frantic journal entries detailing his growing fear, a script. The signs of a struggle at the cabin in the woods. a carefully set stage. The whole narrative of a man consumed by terror, a fabrication. None of it was the end of the story. It was the beginning of a chase. Thomas wasn't just gone. He was methodically, deliberately erasing himself.
Ho, ho, ho!
And Miller realized with a grim certainty he wasn't just chasing a missing person anymore. He was hunting a phantom. The question wasn't asterisk where asterisk was Thomas Johnson. The question was asterisk who asterisk was Thomas Johnson. What kind of person orchestrates their own disappearance, leaving a trail of perfectly crafted lies for everyone to follow?
Ho, ho, ho!
It suggested a level of planning, a foresight, that was deeply unsettling. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was a long con. Every tear Sarah shed, every sleepless night the children endured, every hour of volunteers spent searching the cold woods, it was all part of his design. He had weaponized their love and concern for him, using it as a smokescreen to cover his escape. Miller started re-examining everything.
Ho, ho, ho!
The open journal on the cabin table, filled with panicked scrawls about being watched. Was it a genuine record of fear, or was it a prop left intentionally to be found? The broken window latch, was it forced from the outside, or carefully broken from the inside? Every piece of evidence now had a double meaning. It was like reading a book for the second time.
Ho, ho, ho!
And realizing the narrator was unreliable, that everything you thought you knew was a lie. The clues weren't pointing to a kidnapper or an accident. They were pointing to a master manipulator, a man who knew exactly how a disappearance should look. And he played the part to perfection. This changes the entire investigation. It's no longer a rescue mission. It's a manhunt.
Ho, ho, ho!
But how do you hunt a man who is so good at becoming invisible? He hadn't just run away, he had shed his old identity like a snake sheds its skin. The Thomas Johnson they knew, the friendly neighbor, the loving father, the devoted husband, that person was likely a fiction he had created long ago. The man on that security footage, buying bread with no expression on his face, that was the real man.
Ho, ho, ho!
A stranger, a ghost who had planned his own death and resurrection. And the motive? Why go to such extreme lengths? Was he running from debt? A secret life? Or was it something darker, something so twisted that faking his own disappearance was the only way out? Miller knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Finding Thomas Johnson wasn't about bringing a man home anymore.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was about uncovering a truth that was likely far more disturbing than anyone in Maple Creek could have ever imagined. The chase was on, and the rules had completely changed. The man they were looking for was always one step ahead because he was the one who wrote the map. The city was a different world. Noise, motion, distraction everywhere. The perfect place for someone to disappear, to simply melt away into the relentless stream of faces and sounds. Detective Miller wasn't searching a neighborhood anymore. He was searching for a ghost in a crowd. Of millions, every lead had run dry, every witness had nothing to say.
Ho, ho, ho!
Thomas wasn't just missing. It was as if he'd never existed in the first place. The city, with its concrete canyons and neon haze, had swallowed him whole, and then, after weeks of hitting dead ends, a break, a small, dusty pawn shop tucked away on a forgotten side street, smelling of old paper and desperation.
Ho, ho, ho!
And there, under the grime of the glass counter, was a watch. Not just any watch, Thomas's watch. It was a vintage piece, a family heirloom he never took off. Miller's heart pounded. This was it. The first tangible piece of the puzzle. The pawnbroker. A man whose eyes had seen 1,000 stories like this, described who sold it.
Ho, ho, ho!
The details were hazy, but the price wasn't. It was sold cheap, like the seller needed to erase a part of themselves, and fast. But there was a twist. A detail that made the hairs on Miller's arms stand up. Thomas hadn't sold it himself. The man who did was nervous, jumpy, constantly looking over his shoulder.
Ho, ho, ho!
The pawnbroker, after some gentle persuasion, remembered one more thing. The man mentioned heading toward the riverfront, an industrial dead zone, a graveyard of forgotten factories and empty warehouses, the kind of place where secrets go to rot. Quietly, undisturbed, as Miller drove toward the river, a heavy silence began to replace the city's hum.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was an unnatural quiet, the kind that feels heavier than noise. He got out of his car, the air thick with the smell of decay and damp metal. Rows of derelict buildings stood like skeletal sentinels against the darkening sky. And there, in the fading light, a silhouette, framed in the doorway of a crumbling warehouse. Miller's pulse quickened, but as he got closer, he realized it wasn't Thomas.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was someone else, someone gaunt-haunted, but someone who carried the same air of desperation Miller had been chasing for weeks. Someone who knew him, someone who had been close. Their eyes met across the expanse of cracked concrete. For a split second, the world stood still. There was a flash of recognition in the man's eyes, then pure, undiluted panic.
Ho, ho, ho!
And then he ran. The chase was chaos. Footsteps slammed against the ground, echoing through the empty industrial park. Breath burned in Miller's chest, a raw fire in his lungs. The suspect moved with a desperate agility, weaving through rusted fences and over broken freight lines. He moved like he'd lived his whole life in these shadows, like this maze of urban decay was his natural habitat.
Ho, ho, ho!
Miller pushed harder, his body screaming in protest. He couldn't lose him, Doc, not now. This was the closest he had been to the truth, to understanding what had happened to Thomas. The city blurred into a smear of gray and rust. The world narrowed to that one moving target, a fleeting shadow just ahead. The chase led them out of the warehouse district and onto an old, dilapidated pier.
Ho, ho, ho!
The water below was black as ink, and the wind cutting in from the river felt sharp as glass against Miller's skin. He was closing the distance. Just a few more feet. He reached up, his fingers brushing against the fabric of the man's jacket. So close, but just as he made contact, the suspect launched himself off the side of the pier.
Ho, ho, ho!
For a horrifying moment, Miller thought he had jumped into the water. But then a speedboat rose from the darkness, its engine roaring to life as if it had been waiting there all along. The man hit the deck, scrambled inside, and the boat tore away, disappearing into the river's endless black. Gone again. Miller stood at the edge of the pier, his lungs burning, his hands clenched into fists.
Ho, ho, ho!
So close, so damn close. The frustration was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had been right there. He had touched him. As the waves from the boat lapped against the pier's decaying pylons, he felt the familiar cold dread of failure creeping back in. He had lost the only real lead he'd ever had. He scanned the area, a desperate last-ditch effort, hoping for anything. A dropped wallet, a key, anything.
Ho, ho, ho!
And then he saw it, something small, something easy to miss, pressed against a wet piling, a slip of paper. It was damp, crumpled, almost indistinguishable from the other debris on the pier. He carefully picked it up, his fingers numb from the cold. It was a receipt from a local diner, dated today. That was enough to reignite a flicker of hope.
Ho, ho, ho!
But it was what was on the back that made his blood run cold. Scrawled in jagged, hurried handwriting were a few chilling words: The past is a grave. Stop digging, or you'll bury the town with him. Suddenly, everything shifted. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This wasn't just about finding Thomas. This was about protection. This was about fear. This was about power.
Ho, ho, ho!
This note, this desperate warning, it changed everything. Someone wasn't scared of Thomas being found. They were terrified of what he knew. And they were willing to do anything and silence anyone to keep that secret buried. Miller looked out at the dark water. The city lights twinkling like distant, indifferent stars. He was no longer just searching for a man.
Ho, ho, ho!
He was digging into a grave, and he had a terrible feeling he was about to find out just how deep it went. It all started not with a dramatic chase or a shootout, but under the sterile, fluorescent lights of the Maple Creek Public Library, a detective, let's call him Miller, found a man named Leo Vance methodically feeding documents into a shredder. It was like watching someone try to erase history, one page at a time.
Ho, ho, ho!
This was the blackmail. But when Detective Miller went to make the arrest, Leo didn't fight. He didn't run. He just exhaled. It was a sigh of profound relief, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment his entire life. But here's where the story takes its first turn. This wasn't about money. It was never about the cash. This was about something far deeper, far more personal: vengeance.
Ho, ho, ho!
Back in the cold, sterile interrogation room, Leo finally broke his silence. He began to speak, and his words painted a picture of a life torn apart by a 30-year-old tragedy. He told the detectives about his sister Eliza. He described her as smart, bright, a person who was loved by everyone she met.
Ho, ho, ho!
A shining star in their small town. But 30 years ago, that star was extinguished. Eliza died. The official story, the one the town accepted, was that it was a tragic accident. But Leo looked Detective Miller straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering, and said, "No, they killed her." According to Leo, Eliza had stumbled upon a secret.
Ho, ho, ho!
A massive, town-wide scheme orchestrated by the most respected and powerful families in Maple Creek. We're talking about forged land deeds, stolen property, and vast sums of money being funneled through a web of fake companies. It was a quiet, polished, white-collar crime hidden behind a facade of respectability.
Ho, ho, ho!
When Eliza threatened to expose everything to bring their carefully constructed world crashing down, they silenced her. They pushed her off that old, abandoned railway bridge and let the town believe it was an accident. They covered it up, buried the secret, and the town of Maple Creek simply moved on, or at least it appeared to.
Ho, ho, ho!
And this is the part of the story that shatters everything we thought we knew. This is where the vanished man, Thomas, comes back into the picture. Thomas helped them. Not willingly, not at first. He was young back then, barely an adult, but he was brilliant with numbers. His own father, one of the masterminds behind the entire scheme, brought him in to fix the books.
Ho, ho, ho!
His task was to make the crime disappear on paper, to create a clean ledger that would fool any investigator. And he did. He was successful. But the weight of that act, the knowledge of what he had covered up, haunted him for the next 3 decades. So, when Leo Vance started the blackmail, he wasn't looking for a payout. He didn't want money. He wanted to break Thomas.
Ho, ho, ho!
He wanted to apply so much pressure that Thomas would finally confess, dragging the ugly 30-year-old truth screaming into the daylight for the entire town to see. He wanted justice for Eliza. And he believed Thomas held the key. But Thomas didn't crack. He didn't confess. He chose a path that was infinitely heavier. Instead of breaking, he erased himself.
Ho, ho, ho!
He walked away from everything he had ever known: his home, his career, his children, his wife, Sarah. He didn't do it to escape punishment. He did it to protect them from it. Imagine Sarah, Thomas's wife. From a one-way mirror in the next room, she watched Leo Vance's confession. For years, she had cycled through a storm of emotions. She had hated Thomas for leaving.
Ho, ho, ho!
She had mourned him as if he were dead. She had screamed his name into the darkness, begging for an answer that never came. But now, in that moment, hearing the truth, everything shifted. A devastating realization washed over her. He didn't vanish because he didn't love them. He vanished because he loved them too much.
Ho, ho, ho!
He made the conscious decision to let the world see him as a coward, as a man who abandoned his family, so that they would never be shattered by the truth he carried. He knew that if the scandal came to light, his family's name would be dragged through the mud.
Ho, ho, ho!
Their lives would be destroyed by the sins of his father and by his own youthful complicity. His disappearance wasn't an act of abandonment. It was an act of sacrifice. He chose a life of solitary exile, carrying a burden of guilt and shame, all to build a wall around the people he loved most. He took the fall so they wouldn't have to.
Ho, ho, ho!
A truly heartbreaking end to a mystery that was never really about a missing person, but about the incredible, painful lengths one person will go to for love. What a powerful and tragic story. It really makes you think about the hidden burdens people carry. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. Maple Creek didn't just react, it imploded. When the scandal broke, it wasn't some distant, shadowy cabal of criminals that was exposed. It was the town's own pantheon of heroes. The revered father of the current mayor, the bank president who approved your first mortgage, retired judge. People still instinctively lowered their voices around. These weren't just men. They were institutions.
Ho, ho, ho!
Their names were literally carved into the town's identity on plaques in the town hall, painted onto the signs at the community park, etched into the very bedtime stories parents told their children about the town's founding fathers. They were the pillars holding up the sky over Maple Creek. And then, in a flash, everyone saw what those names really stood for. A brutal murder. A meticulously crafted cover-up. A lie so pervasive it had poisoned the town's soil for 30 long years. The initial shock wasn't about the crime itself, as horrific as it was.
Ho, ho, ho!
The question that hung in the thick, silent air wasn't, how could they do such a thing? No, it was far more intimate, far more terrifying. The question was, who helped them stay protected all this time? Suddenly, the familiar fabric of daily life began to unravel. Lifelong friends started eyeing each other with a suspicion they'd never known. Neighbors who used to wave from their porches now stared at their feet, avoiding eye contact at all costs.
Ho, ho, ho!
The trust that had been the bedrock of this community, the unspoken glue that held everything together, evaporated like morning fog under a relentless, scorching sun. Everything that had once defined Maple Creek, its pride, its history, its sense of security, it all felt like ash blowing in the wind. And then, into this smoldering ruin, Thomas came back. He didn't sneak in under the cover of darkness. He wasn't hiding or running. He walked straight down Main Street in the full, unforgiving light of day, while everyone watched from behind their shop windows and parted curtains.
Ho, ho, ho!
He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside, like life had painstakingly carved him down to the bone. You could see the years of torment in the lines around his eyes, the weight of his secret in the slump of his shoulders. He didn't return to defend himself, to plead his case, or to beg for understanding. He returned to finally, irrevocably, tell the truth. The reaction was immediate and fractured. Some people pointed, their faces contorted with fury. Their voices dripped with betrayal. He abandoned us. One person shouted,
Ho, ho, ho!
he let us suffer while he ran away. Cried another, he's a coward. But others, the ones who looked closer, saw something different in his haunted eyes. They saw that he wasn't the villain of this story. He was a man who had been trapped by a secret older than his own marriage, older than his entire adult life. He was a man who had carried a guilt so heavy it had physically reshaped his face over the decades. Inside the sterile, quiet walls of the police station, his voice was steady, but every word seemed to tear a fresh wound.
Ho, ho, ho!
He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He didn't seem to believe he deserved it. He was simply explaining the cage he had lived in for 30 years. He spoke of being young, ambitious, and desperate to make his powerful father proud. He described how the conspiracy was sold to him not as a crime, but as an act of civic duty, a necessary sacrifice for protecting the future of Maple Creek. He recounted the moment he learned that Eliza Vance, a name whispered for years as a tragic accident, a cautionary tale, didn't just die.
Ho, ho, ho!
She was killed, and he detailed how that knowledge had lived inside him ever since, growing like a tumor, poisoning every good moment, every success, every relationship. He hadn't disappeared a few weeks ago to escape punishment. He disappeared because he knew it was the only way to force the truth into the light. By vanishing, he made himself the story, ensuring that the questions would become too loud to ignore. He had to burn his own life down to start a fire big enough to illuminate the decades-old rot at the heart of the town.
Ho, ho, ho!
But his confession didn't bring closure. It only raised a new, more terrifying question, one that Maple Creek now faced and no one wanted to ask aloud. Can a town survive the very truth that built it? The powerful families implicated in the cover-up didn't waste a second. The best lawyers were hired instantly. Walls of silence went up. Carefully rehearsed stories began to circulate, muddying the waters. The truth, after being buried for so long, was now under fresh assault. On the other side stood the Vance family.
Ho, ho, ho!
For 3 decades, they had been the town's prize, their grief dismissed as delusion, their search for answers mocked as a morbid obsession. Now, vindicated but still broken, they demanded justice. Not the quiet, negotiated justice of backroom deals, but real, public, undeniable justice. And the rest of Maple Creek. They were frozen, caught in the impossible space between 2 choices. Do they forgive Thomas, the man who finally spoke the truth, even though he hid it for so long?
Ho, ho, ho!
Or do they pursue justice at all costs, even if it means tearing down the very foundations of the town, the families, the institutions, the history, and admitting that their entire lives were built on a lie? Thomas didn't end the story with his confession. He just started the reckoning. And now the soul of Maple Creek hangs in the balance. The initial shockwave gave way to a chilling, calculated silence from the town's elite. The families whose names were now forever linked to Eliza Vance's death didn't issue apologies.
Ho, ho, ho!
They issued threats, veiled in legal jargon. Non-disclosure agreements from decades past were suddenly brandished like weapons. The narrative they began to spin was insidious. Thomas was an unreliable, troubled man. His confession was the desperate act of someone on the verge of a breakdown. They tried to paint him as the sole architect of a fantasy, while they were the true victims of his malicious lies. This strategy was brutally effective because it preyed on the town's deepest fear, that everything was a lie. If the town's founders were corrupt, what did that say about Maple Creek itself?
Ho, ho, ho!
Was it easier to believe one man was broken than to believe the entire system was? People wanted to cling to the old certainties, to the comforting myths they had grown up with. The idea of the noble judge, the generous bank president, these were more than just stories, they were articles of faith. To abandon them felt like abandoning their own identity. Meanwhile, the Vance family became the town's conscience, and it was a role that made many deeply uncomfortable. They weren't just asking for arrests, they were asking for a complete moral inventory.
Ho, ho, ho!
They started a small memorial for Eliza by the creek where her body was found, a place that had been deliberately left unmarked for 30 years. Every day more flowers, more notes, more small tokens of remembrance appeared. It became a silent, growing protest, a physical manifestation of the truth that refused to be buried again. Young people in town, who had no memory of the original event, were the most drawn to it. For them, this wasn't about the past, it was about the present. It was about whether they wanted to live in a town that valued comfort over justice.
Ho, ho, ho!
Thomas, out on bail, became a ghost in his own town. He didn't hide, but he was isolated. Old friends would cross the street to avoid him. The silence in the grocery store when he walked in was deafening. He was a living embodiment of the town's dilemma. To some, he was a pariah who had betrayed his own father and his community. To others, he was a tragic hero, a man who had sacrificed everything to do the right thing, albeit 3 decades too late. The divide wasn't just philosophical, it became practical. Businesses owned by the accused families saw boycotts.
Ho, ho, ho!
People began whispering about moving their money from the town bank. The town council meetings became chaotic shouting matches. Every decision, no matter how small, from funding the library to repairing a pothole, was viewed through the lens of the scandal. Which side are you on? Became the unspoken question behind every interaction. Then came the first crack in the wall of silence. A retired deputy, a man in his late 70s, riddled with guilt and his own mortality, walked into the police station.
Ho, ho, ho!
His confession corroborated Thomas's story. He spoke of being a young officer, ordered by the then sheriff to tamper with evidence, to rewrite reports. He described the pressure, the threats to his career and his family. He had lived with the shame for 30 years, and he couldn't bear to take it to his grave. His testimony was the tipping point. It made the conspiracy real, tangible. It was no longer just Thomas's word against the town's most powerful men. The lie was starting to unravel, thread by painful thread.
Ho, ho, ho!
The question for Maple Creek was no longer asterisk if asterisk the truth would come out, but what would be left of the town once it did? Could they rebuild on a foundation of truth, even if it meant acknowledging that their past was a crime scene? Or would the weight of the revelation cause the entire structure to collapse, leaving nothing but ruins and resentment? The reckoning had begun, and it threatened to consume everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the heart of Maple Creek. It's a story about secrets, truth, and the difficult choices communities face.
Ho, ho, ho!
If you found this compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. The Johnson house was quiet again, but this wasn't the agonizing silence that screamed of loss. No, this was a different kind, a fragile kind. It was the quiet of a wound beginning to heal. You could hear it in the soft footsteps on the floorboards, the gentle click of a closing door.
Ho, ho, ho!
You could even hear it in the laughter of the kids playing in the backyard, a sound so rare lately it felt almost foreign, a ghost of a happier time. Life was seeping back into the home slowly, cautiously, like a wary deer peeking out from the woods, unsure if the danger has truly passed.
Ho, ho, ho!
Thomas drifted through the rooms as if he were in a museum dedicated to his own life. Each object held a story, a memory. The armchair where he used to read to the kids. The picture frames on the mantelpiece. The way the late afternoon sun cast golden bars across the hardwood floor.
Ho, ho, ho!
Every single detail was a sharp reminder of what he had almost lost, and a sobering thought of what might never fully return. Outside, in the garden, Sarah worked. Her hands moved through the soil with a steady, deliberate rhythm. It was clear she wasn't just tending to flowers. She was trying to replant something far more fundamental: trust, security, love.
Ho, ho, ho!
These are not things that grow back easily once uprooted. They need time, care, and the right conditions to even begin to sprout again. But healing within the four walls of their home was only half the story. Because beyond their front door, the town of Maple Creek was still bleeding. It wasn't the same place. The betrayal hadn't just exposed old crimes, it had exposed everyone's complacency.
Ho, ho, ho!
You could feel the change in the air. People walked a little slower now, their conversations were hushed, their smiles less frequent and more guarded. Once you learned that the peace you enjoyed was built upon someone else's forced silence, you start to question everything. You start wondering what other truths you've been willing to ignore just to keep things comfortable.
Ho, ho, ho!
The conspiracy wasn't just a scandal anymore. It had become a mirror, and Maple Creek was horrified by the reflection staring back. One evening, as the sun melted into a fiery orange behind the trees, Thomas found Sarah sitting on the back porch. A blanket was wrapped tightly around her shoulders as she stared out into the fading light, lost in thought.
Ho, ho, ho!
He sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her space. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He just sat, offering his presence as a silent form of support. The distance between them was palpable, a heavy, earned chasm created by secrets and pain. It was a silence filled with everything they couldn't yet say, but then something shifted.
Ho, ho, ho!
Her hand slowly, deliberately, slid across the space between them and covered his. No grand declaration, no tearful monologue of apology. Just her fingers, warm and real, interlocking with his. It was a silent promise, a quiet understanding that whatever damage remained, they would face it together. This wasn't the effortless, sun-drenched love they once had.
Ho, ho, ho!
This was something else. This was love that had been tested, broken, and painstakingly pieced back together. This was love that survived. And sometimes, the love that survives is the strongest of all. But peace is a deceptive thing, especially when the truth is incomplete. Thomas knew deep in his bones that the hardest part was far from over. Yes, the immediate threat of the blackmailer was gone.
Ho, ho, ho!
Yes, the town was finally aware of the dark secret it had harbored for so long, but the powerful men who had orchestrated the original tragedy, the ones whose wealth and influence had bought silence and buried justice, they were still out there, untouched, protected, unscathed. For now, the scales of justice hadn't been balanced. They had barely even begun to tip.
Ho, ho, ho!
Some sins, he was learning, don't just die and fade away. They echo, they linger in the quiet moments, in the heavy air, in the unspoken words that hang between every conversation. And in that disquieting realization, Thomas understood something terrifying. Some chapters don't truly end, they just lie dormant, waiting for the right moment to continue.
Ho, ho, ho!